Records are cool. Crazy stats, rings, legendary teams, winning the French Scrabble Championship despite not speaking French, whatever. The kind of records that every child dreams of breaking or being a part of. However, for every cool record, there are a bunch that are utterly pointless. Records that don't matter, that nobody cares about or even wants to break. If you've ever read one of these, you know that there are some dumb records. I think the most obviously and inexplicably stupid record in sports is the preseason winning streak of the Baltimore Ravens. From August 11th, 2016 to August 21st, 2023, the Baltimore Ravens won 24 consecutive preseason games. The closest team to this record is the Green Bay Packers, who won 19 preseason games in a row, spanning from 1959 to 1962. Today, we're going to look at the numbers of the Baltimore Ravens and their 24-game winning streak. We're going to go year by year, analyzing each result. We're going to estimate how unlikely this preseason winning streak was, and then we will compute the statistics from this streak and compare them to those of actual NFL seasons. Before we start, we'll talk a little more about the Ravens and the concept of the NFL preseason. Those with some knowledge of football would know that the Baltimore Ravens have been one of the NFL's first-class organizations for their entire 30-year existence. John Harbaugh has been one of the game's best coaches in the modern NFL, and the Ravens have an especially strong culture of drafting and developing players. Because of this, many might think that this preseason winning streak is a product of a good organizational culture and strong depth. However, this does not explain a 24-game winning streak, and if you look around the NFL, there is basically no correlation between preseason success and regular or postseason success. The players involved in these games are obviously trying, and many of them are just fighting for the chance to play any form of professional football, but the teams do not care. For executives, no matter what they say, the preseason is to evaluate players on the roster bubble and experiment with new rule changes. And the funny thing about this record is that it largely exists due to fringe NFL players, many of whom are now likely working in industries that have absolutely nothing to do with professional football. And there's legitimate statistical evidence that the preseason doesn't mean anything. A few years ago, a Reddit post compared teams with perfect preseason records versus teams with winless preseasons, and noted that their winning percentages were almost identical. Anecdotally, there are a lot of counterexamples that show how meaningless the preseason is. The two 0-16 teams, the 2008 Detroit Lions and the 2017 Cleveland Browns, had perfect preseasons, and the Peyton Manning-era Colts were consistently awful in the preseason. If anything, it's actually remarkable how little correlation, positive or negative, there is between preseason success and regular season success. And it seems that with time, the NFL preseason has become more and more meaningless. Teams used to play a large number of their starters in the preseason, some for multiple games, but almost nobody does this anymore. Sean McVay of the Los Angeles Rams is likely the person most responsible for the changed attitude towards preseason games. In 2018, the LA Rams played no starters in the preseason. Then, they proceeded to start 8-0, go 13-3 overall, and make it to the Super Bowl. After this point, I think many executives and coaches realized that preseason reps were not necessary, and the risk of injury far outweighed the reward of warming up players. So, I think we've established just how unimportant and random the NFL preseason is, and now our job is to estimate the likelihood of Baltimore's preseason winning streak, and see what other fun information we can dig up on the way. Many calculations involving likelihood use something known as probability. In case you don't know, the probability of an event is the likelihood of that event occurring. The probability of an event ranges from 0, no chance of happening, all the way up to 1, an 100% chance of happening, or a guarantee that something will happen. To convert from a percent chance to a probability, all we have to do is move the decimal 2 places to the right. A 50% chance of happening is probability 0.5, a 75% chance is 0.75, and so on. Now, the way we're going to find the probability of this preseason winning streak is by using the following formula. The probability of winning Game 1 of the preseason winning streak times the probability of winning Game 2 of the preseason winning streak times the probability of winning Game 3 of the preseason winning streak, all the way up to that 24th and final game. In this case, we are assuming that each of these games is an independent event, where the occurrence of one event doesn't impact the probability of another event. Or in other words, winning Game 1 of the preseason winning streak isn't going to impact the probability of winning Game 17 of the preseason winning streak. And if we want to find the probability of a group of these 24 independent events, each preseason win, happening, then we can just multiply all the probabilities together like this. So now, our next goal is to find the probability of the Ravens winning each of these preseason games. In previous videos, I've estimated the probability of certain events happening in sports by looking at the American odds of those events on betting sites, then converting these American odds to an implied probability before adjusting to the over-round. So now, you may be wondering about the intricate wizardry I'm about to pull off to estimate the probabilities of all 24 of these preseason games. I've read the greatest mathematics literature, I've consulted all of the experts, I've spent months making several different models, weighing the pros and cons of each one, often returning to the drawing board until I got it right. And after all my work, I've finally found the best method possible. Just giving the Ravens a probability of 0.5 or a 50% chance to win every preseason game. I will be honest, I have no idea how you could accurately measure the probability of the Ravens winning these preseason games. I don't believe there's betting data dating back to the 2016 preseason, I don't believe this data would even be remotely accurate, and I don't even want to believe that betting on preseason games exists in the first place. I could make a small adjustment to the probabilities based on if the games are home or away, but even these would even out over the long run, and I don't see the point. If you're not satisfied, I'll show one small tweak to this in a little bit. So, the way we're going to calculate the probability of the preseason winning streak lasting 24 games is just the following. 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5, we're going to do that 24 times. Or, if you're feeling fancy, you could write this as 0.5 to the 24th power. We're multiplying 0.5 by itself 24 times. Or, if you're feeling even fancier, you could write 1 over 2 to the 24th power. We could plug in the numbers and end the video here, but I think it'd be far more interesting to look at this season by season and see how the Ravens were performing in these games, if they were even close in these games, and how the probability of this winning streak changed as it continued to get bigger and bigger. Let's hop in the time machine and go back to 2016. Game 1 of the 2016 preseason was a home game against the Carolina Panthers, where the Ravens won 22-19. The primary players on offense for the Ravens were Terrence West, Buck Allen, and Kenneth Dixon at running back, Darren Waller and Jeremy Butler as pass catchers, and Josh Johnson and the late Ryan Mallett as quarterback. Joe Flacco, Baltimore's starting QB at the time, didn't play, but Cam Newton was given one series for the Panthers. On the defensive side of the ball, Matthew Judon was the team leader in tackles. For a preseason game, this is actually a pretty impressive lineup. Most of these players were or became NFL regulars, at least for a few years, with Judon and Waller being the most successful of the bunch. The only player among those I mentioned that didn't really make it was Jeremy Butler, who according to his LinkedIn account, is now working outside of football. In Game 2, the Ravens took on the Indianapolis Colts. In this game, Josh Johnson and Ryan Mallett once again got the bulk of the snaps at the quarterback position, and the main weapons on offense were mostly just the same guys: Jeremy Butler, Terrence West, Buck Allen, Chris Moore, and Kamar Aiken. Andrew Luck played a few reps for the Colts, but Joe Flacco still hadn't come back from last season's injury. Once again, the bulk of players involved had decent NFL careers, which shows how different the preseason was in 2016 compared to now, at least for the Ravens. The thing that makes this game especially interesting is how the Ravens won. Late in the fourth quarter, the Colts took an 18-17 lead with a touchdown, and they attempted to go for the two-point conversion to be up by a field goal, only for Ravens defensive back Anthony Levine to intercept the two-point conversion attempt and take it back for two. The Ravens went on to win this game 19-18. Game 3 of the preseason was traditionally one in which the starters would play the most, and this was the case for the 2016 Ravens. Joe Flacco returned to action, and he and Ryan Mallett took the majority of the snaps at the quarterback position. Most of the same names were running the ball, but the pass catchers largely consisted of starters for the Ravens that year, with Jeremy Butler being the only exception. And, on defense, it looks like many of the starters were also heavily involved. In this game, the Ravens crushed the Lions 30-9 at home. The fourth game of the preseason is often one where very few, if any, starters are involved. This is the game where the teams are trying to make every small decision possible. Who are they going to put on their kick return unit? Who are they going to try and sneak to their practice squad? There's no point in playing a veteran future Hall of Famer like Terrell Suggs. In this game against the Saints, the stars of this game were notorious NFL journeyman Josh Johnson, Steven Houston, a guy who never even made an NFL roster and is now working as a strength coach, and Chris Matthews, a guy who played very little in the NFL but had a few huge plays for Seattle in their 2014 run to the Super Bowl. Due to a strong second quarter, the Ravens ended up winning this game 23-14. So, the Ravens at this point have won 4 preseason games in a row. This happens for a few teams each year. There's nothing that surprising about it. The probability of this happening would just be 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5, or 0.5 to the 4th power. This equals 0.0625, corresponding to a 6.25% chance of this winning streak happening. Moving on to 2017, the Ravens started the preseason by hosting Washington, a very common preseason opponent for geographical reasons. This one wasn't even close. The Ravens won 23-3, and the players most involved in this victory on offense were Taquan Mizell, Josh Woodrum, Terrence West, Ryan Mallett, and a very large group of pass catchers. The defense obviously dominated this game, but it appears as if there were a large number of NFL regulars involved here. For Game 2, the Ravens traveled to Miami to take on the Dolphins. Ryan Mallett and Josh Woodrum once again led the offense at quarterback, and Taquan Mizell was the biggest star among skill positioners. The Ravens cruised to a 31-7 victory. The third game of the 2017 preseason was a home game against the Buffalo Bills, and the offensive contributions were largely from the same group. Woodrum and Mallett split starts, and Taquan Mizell had an excellent game as a receiving back. However, the story of the game appears to be that the Buffalo quarterback play wasn't very good. The Ravens ended up winning this game 13-9. Like in 2016, the Ravens ended their preseason in New Orleans. This time, Thaddeus Lewis was the main quarterback in this game. Taquan Mizell continued to be used heavily, and Bobby Rainey Jr. also had a strong game in the backfield. Chris Matthews returned and got 3 receptions for 66 yards. Few of the players on defense went on to become NFL regulars, but recent draft picks Chuck Clark and Marlon Humphrey did. The Ravens were very close to having their streak ended in this game. The Saints were down 1 point at the end of the game, and Will Lutz attempted a 59-yard field goal in an attempt to win the game. I'm here right now making this video, so that means that the field goal attempt was no good. The Ravens won 14-13. After the 2017 preseason, the Ravens had won 8 preseason games in a row, and the probability of the streak lasting this long would just be 0.5 to the 8th power, roughly 0.0039. We could also calculate this by taking 1 over 2 to the 8th power, which would just be 1 to the 8th power over 2 to the 8th power, which would just be 1 in 256. So, there's about a 1 in 256 chance of the Ravens winning 8 preseason games in a row. The 2018 preseason was a bit different because it featured 5 games instead of 4. Due to Ray Lewis's Hall of Fame induction, the Ravens took part in the Hall of Fame game against the Chicago Bears in Canton, Ohio. The most interesting part of this game is that it was the first time Lamar Jackson suited up in the NFL. Other quarterbacks being used in this game were Robert Griffin III and Josh Woodrum. The other big star for the Ravens was Gus Edwards, who really made a name for himself during this preseason. This was another really close call for the Ravens. The Bears scored a touchdown late, tried the 2-point conversion to take the lead, and failed. The Ravens won this game 17-16. One interesting aspect of preseason games is that teams will generally try and win the game rather than tie it with a late touchdown, just to avoid having to play overtime. This isn't going to be the last time that the Ravens benefit from this quirk. Their next game of the 2018 preseason was at home against the Los Angeles Rams, who played virtually no starters in this game. The Ravens crushed them 33-7. Joe Flacco got 1 series, but Lamar Jackson played the majority of the snaps. Gus Edwards once again was a key part of the offense. Running backs Delance Turner and Mark Thompson also had their fair share of touches as well. For their third game, the Ravens went to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. All of Joe Flacco, RG3, and Lamar Jackson were given reps, but Jackson got the majority of them. Gus Edwards remained the main running back. This game ended very similarly to the game against the Bears. The Colts scored a touchdown late to pull within 1 of the Ravens, then attempted the 2-point conversion to win. They failed it, and the Ravens won 20-19. The fourth game of the 2018 preseason was in Miami, and it wasn't particularly competitive. The Ravens pulled away late, outscoring Miami 24-0 in the second half and winning 27-10. The trio of Lamar Jackson, RG3, and Josh Woodrum were their quarterbacks, and some of the main skill positioners in this game were Delance Turner, Tim White, Devier Posey, and Jordan Lasley. And finally, the Ravens closed out their preseason at home against Washington. Lamar Jackson played the bulk of this one, since Joe Flacco was still the bona fide starter at the time, but Josh Woodrum got some chances too. Mark Thompson and Delance Turner led the backfield, and Brashad Perriman and a rookie Mark Andrews led the pass catchers. The defense played a big part of this win though, forcing Washington quarterback Kevin Hogan to throw 2 interceptions. One of those interceptions was to Kai Nakua, older brother of Puka Nakua. The Ravens won 30-20. So, after the 2018 preseason, the Ravens had won 4 + 4 + 5, 13 preseason games in a row. The probability of this streak reaching 13 would have been 0.5 to the 13th power, which equals around 0.000122. The other way you could write this as 1 over 2 to the 13th power, which equals a 1 in 8,192 chance. Now, for all my Pokemon fans out there, the probability of the Ravens winning this many games in a row is the same as the probability of you finding a shiny Pokemon on your next wild encounter. Anyone who has played these games know that you might spend years without encountering a shiny Pokemon, so this really emphasizes how unlikely this streak is becoming. Moving on to 2019, The first game of the preseason was arguably the least competitive of any during this entire streak. The Ravens won 29-0 at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but I don't even think the score does it justice. The Jaguars weren't even able to cross the 50-yard line a single time in the game. On offense, Trace McSorley was the main quarterback being used, but Lamar Jackson and Joe Callahan were also given snaps. Delance Turner and recent draft pick Justice Hill were the primary running backs for this game. Lots of different pass catchers were involved, with Chris Moore leading the way. However, this game was primarily a defensive story, and here were some of the names that were playing on defense. The second game was routine. The Ravens won 26-13 at home against the Green Bay Packers. Some of the Ravens' best pieces, including Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram, were given more reps here, but it's largely the same names involved: Justice Hill, Delance Turner, Trace McSorley, and Chris Moore. On defense, Otero Alaka led the Ravens in tackles, and he was able to turn his performance in this preseason into a few years on an NFL roster. The third preseason game in 2019 was wildly controversial. In a road game against the Eagles, the Ravens dominated the first half, outscoring Philadelphia 26-0. Trace McSorley started virtually the entire game, Delance Turner led the backfield, Michael Floyd made a few big catches. However, in the second half, Philadelphia stormed back with 15 unanswered points and had all of the momentum. Then, in the fourth quarter with 11 minutes left, there were lightning strikes in the vicinity of the field. During regular season delays, everyone just waits until the adverse weather conditions end, and then go back to playing. However, the NFL simply ended this game after the lightning strikes, and at this point, all national media outlets were suspicious. Was the Ravens organization in cahoots with NASA to end this game prematurely to maintain the winning streak? We don't know for sure, but what we do know at this point is that the Ravens are a win away from their fourth straight undefeated preseason. The final preseason game of 2019 was a road game against, you guessed it, Washington. Not every game during this streak has an interesting storyline. This game was more of what we saw in the previous games. McSorley and Callahan were the quarterbacks, Delance Turner and Kenneth Dixon led the backfield, and Jaleel Scott had a big day as a pass catcher. The Ravens won 20-7. On defense, Brendan Trawick and Otero Alaka likely won their roster spots based on this game. So, after the 2019 preseason, the winning streak was officially at 17 games. The probability of the streak lasting this long is 0.5 to the 17th power, or 1/2 to the 17th power. This equals 1 in 131,072, or in decimal form, this number on the screen that I'm not going to read out loud because I'm reading this script really far from my computer and I can't tell how many zeros there are. There were a few changes to the preseason before the Ravens' next preseason game. Due to the pandemic, preseason games were straight up cancelled in 2020. Then, in 2021, the preseason schedule was reduced to 3 games because the NFL added a 17th regular season game. In 2021, the Ravens had the opportunity to both tie and break the previous preseason win record, achieved by the Green Bay Packers from 1959 to 1962. The first preseason game in the 2021 preseason was a home game against the Saints. The Ravens won 17-14 off of a touchdown late in the fourth quarter. Trace McSorley and Tyler Huntley were the quarterbacks, Tyson Williams and Nate McCrary led the backfield, the passing attack was well balanced, and many starters were playing on defense. In the second game, the Ravens had the opportunity to tie Green Bay's streak with a game against the Carolina Panthers. Baltimore's defense dominated and only allowed 3 points. Tyler Huntley started for the entire game, Williams and McCrary once again led the team in carries, and Josh Oliver had 7 receptions. The Ravens won 20-13 and officially were tied with the Packers for the longest preseason win streak. The next week, the Ravens had the opportunity to take sole possession of the record for longest preseason winning streak, and the game wasn't even close. The Ravens won 37-3. Tyler Huntley threw 4 touchdown passes. Nate McCrary had 22 carries for 68 yards. The pass catchers showed up to play as well. The defense obviously dominated. With their 20th consecutive preseason win, the Ravens officially held the record for the longest preseason winning streak in NFL history. However, the most notable thing to come from this game was the season-ending injury to J.K. Dobbins, and a year that turned out to be completely cursed for the Ravens. As we'll see soon, this game likely impacted how the Ravens approached the preseason in future years. The odds of the Ravens winning 20 consecutive preseason games would have been 0.5 to the 20th power, or 1/2 to the 20th power. And that equals 1,048,576, or a ridiculous number in decimal form. At this point, the Google calculator has to use scientific notation to express this, so if that's not a sign that this preseason winning streak is ridiculously unlikely, I don't know what is. 2022 was when the Ravens became significantly more hesitant to play their starters. However, this did not stop them from winning. In the first game, the Ravens beat the Titans at home, 23-10, and the starters really weren't involved in this one. Tyler Huntley and Anthony Brown were the main quarterbacks. All of the running backs were either recently drafted or guys on the roster bubble, players like Nate McCrary, Mike Davis, and Tyler Beatty. Shamar Bridges, Masai Polk, and rookie fourth-round pick Isaiah Likely led the team in receiving yards, and the defense was no different, either rookies or guys not expected to be starters. The second game of the 2022 preseason was a road game against the Arizona Cardinals and former Ravens preseason star Trace McSorley. The offense was largely similar, led by Tyler Huntley, Anthony Brown, Nate McCrary, and an 100-yard game from Isaiah Likely, who was really establishing himself at this point. The Ravens survived a strong comeback attempt from the Cardinals in the fourth quarter and won 24-17. The last game of the 2022 preseason and the 23rd game of the winning streak was a home game against the Washington Commanders. Anthony Brown started almost all of the game at quarterback, and he threw for 256 yards, mostly to Benjamin Victor and DeMarcus Robinson. The running game was very weak, but the Ravens still won, 17-15. However, like last year's preseason finale, a serious injury was the headline of this game. Poe, one of Baltimore's mascots, suffered a drumstick injury during the halftime show, as if the injury luck of this team couldn't be any more devastating. So, after 2022, the streak was officially at 23 games, and the probability of winning all of these 23 games would have been 0.5 to the 23rd power, or 1 in 8,388,608. And in decimal form, that would just be this number. But let's move on to 2023. The Ravens started their preseason with a home game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Once again, very few starters were involved in this game. The quarterbacks participating in this game were Tyler Huntley, Anthony Brown, and Josh Johnson, who is in his third tenure with the Ravens at this point. For some reason, their starting running backs Gus Edwards and Justice Hill were getting carries, but most of their star players were not involved at all, and the receiving yards leaders were all players lower on the depth chart. This was another game that the Ravens won based on a failed two-point conversion. The Eagles scored a touchdown late to put themselves down 1, elected to go for the two-point conversion, and failed. The Ravens won 20-19, and their streak was at 24 games. All good things must come to an end, though. Week 2 of the 2023 preseason was a road game against the Washington Commanders. It was a back-and-forth affair for the entire game. The Ravens took an 8-point lead in the fourth quarter and were trending towards a 25th consecutive victory. However, a late touchdown and a very late field goal led Washington to a 29-28 win. The preseason winning streak officially ended at 24 games, and even though nobody thinks preseason matters, the streak clearly did. At least a little. Everyone was talking about this streak. I was in Spain at the time, and I stayed up until 3 a.m. to watch this game. Heck, look at Joey Sly's celebration after he kicked the go-ahead field goal. Interestingly, it's not like the Ravens went back to winning immediately after this loss. The game actually started a stretch where the Ravens lost 4 of 5 preseason games, continuing through 2024. So altogether, this was a 24-game winning streak, and the probability of the streak lasting this long would be 0.5 to the 24th power, or 1/2 to the 24th power, and that would equal 1 in 16,777,216, or this number here in decimal form. This is the exact same probability as flipping a coin 24 times, and only flipping heads. Seriously, try doing that right now and document the result. You will not come close. And if you don't believe that the preseason winning probability should be 0.5, the streak is still going to be absurd regardless. Even if we assume that the Ravens have a probability of 0.55 of winning every preseason game, the probability of this streak happening would be roughly 1 in 1,703,000. It's hard to even find other unlikely events that we can compare to these. So yeah, winning 24 games is preposterous. But why did they win all of these games? I have collected Baltimore stats during this winning streak, and we're going to compare them to 5 of the greatest NFL teams in the past 20 years. The 2004 Patriots, the 2007 Patriots, the 2013 Seahawks, the 2015 Panthers, and the 2019 Chiefs. First, let's look at the offensive stats. The Ravens averaged around 23 points per game. In terms of yardage, they averaged approximately 196 passing yards and 128 rushing yards per game. The Ravens had exactly 24 turnovers during this winning streak, so they averaged 1 turnover per game. How does this compare to all of the elite teams I just mentioned? It's demonstrably worse than all of them. In terms of points and total yards per game, the preseason Ravens paced worse than all of the 5 aforementioned teams. Their rushing stats weren't the worst of the bunch, but in terms of passing yards and total yards, they were easily the worst. Defense, however, is a different story. The Ravens averaged less than 12 points against per game and around 272 total yards against per game. In terms of both of these stats, the Ravens fared far better than everyone else, though this really shows how ridiculous the 2013 Seahawks were. Interestingly, the Ravens forced turnovers at a lower rate than every other team, indicating that the Ravens just did a good job of stopping the opposing offense and weren't just opportunistic with interceptions and fumble recoveries. In terms of yard differential, the Ravens were only behind the 2013 Seahawks and 2007 Patriots. Their average point differential was only behind the 2015 Panthers, and, unsurprisingly, the 2007 Patriots, who had an unbelievable winning margin of 19.68 points per game. Now, why was the Ravens' defense so good? Well, I don't think it was. When you face quarterbacks like this, or like this, or like this, it's easier to put up gaudy defensive stats. Only allowing 8 points against the record-setting Broncos is probably a slightly better accomplishment. One other subtle factor in this preseason winning streak was likely the special teams. During this winning streak, the Ravens had a field goal percentage of around 87%, while their opponents only made about 69% of their field goal attempts. The Ravens had one of the most accurate kickers in NFL history, and he played in a good chunk of their preseason games. But there were other kickers involved too. The Ravens have been a special teams factory for a long time. Will Lutz was developed through their system for a bit, and they were even able to convince the Vikings to trade a fifth for this guy. So, there you have it. For 7 years, the Ravens won every single one of their preseason games by stomping on awful quarterbacks, denying 2-point conversions, and winning the field goal battle. I'm sure every Ravens fan would gladly exchange this streak for the ability to see their team move the ball against a Steve Spagnuolo defense, but it's cooler to have this streak than not have it. And yeah, Baltimore's winning streak is one of the stupidest things to ever occur on this planet. The only thing that would be dumber than this win streak is if some guy on the internet made an entire YouTube video about it instead of doing something more efficient to improve his resume.